right, welcome back, everyone. Once more, I want to remind you that we're in listen-only mode and that the chat function is available for your comments and questions. All sessions are being recorded and will be available on the Talent Development Center, as I've been saying all day. Don't miss it, the Talent Development Center website, because there's been so much great stuff throughout the day. And now we close with our final presentation, ensuring a diverse workforce. Neenu Sharma is GE Digital's Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of Brand and Corporate Communications. As CDO, Chief Diversity Officer, Neenu forwards the organization's operational goals and priorities as it relates to inclusion and diversity in partnership with human resources, the rest of GE Digital's senior leadership team, and with the other CDOs across GE. Neenu, we welcome you to NAIFA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Impact Week.
Great, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I think I'm joined by Suzanne. So Suzanne, you want to say hello as well?
Yes, hi everybody. This is Suzanne Carowin, Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at NAIFA. And one of the things we're doing this year in particular with our new strategic plan and the expansion of the Talent Development Center and the expansion of our DEI Council is to also invite people, especially people that are outside of our financial services industry. So we start to get a new cross section and we start to diversify ourselves, not just in terms of the people, but also in the thought processes, looking at different corporations, different associations, how other organizations and entities and sectors of our economy are handling diversity. And so it's our great pleasure to have Neenu join us today from a completely different sector than the financial services industry. And she's coming from GE Digital. And I thought it was really important that we bring in, and we're going to learn today where GE Digital is in this process and see how we can start to compare and benchmark and do what marketers like to do all the time, which is R&D it, rip off and duplicate, right? So we'll see how we're doing. And we all know and agree that the financial services industry is woefully behind. I think we can all agree on that in this topic. So I thought it was important that we bring in a completely different viewpoint and see and learn from that. So again, Neenu, really happy to have you here. So before we get started, Neenu, and we're going to do this interview style. And if you want to ask questions also, please use the chat box and we'll keep it interactive as we wrap up today. But I thought it was important, Neenu, that you just kind of start with yourself. And in full disclosure, I know Neenu on a personal level as well. I've known her for years now. And I think it's interesting to kind of hear what has created Neenu, because I think that's some of the uniqueness that she brings to her her profession and certainly her seat at the table there at GE Digital. So Neenu, if you just want to start with that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, and again, I'm thrilled to be here with you guys, and I caught a little bit of the last session. So in really good company here today with all of you. So a little bit about my story and journey. I was born in India. And I moved from India to Canada as a young child. So I was about 3-4 years old. And then I moved to the US, to Texas, in fact, in high school. Went to college in New York and came to Virginia after my MBA. So a little bit of travel. That's, three distinct countries there in terms of living, but felt like more, I think Texas itself could be its own country here in the United States, but it's been a amazing upbringing in that I was constantly in environments where I was often the only person of color and very often the only Indian person in the different communities I lived in until I went to college, which was in New York City, and very intentional on my part to pick a place where, one, I picked a women's college, so I was very intentional about, being there in an environment that actually was about supporting and amplifying women in their education and future careers, but then also just to be in New York and exposure to so many different environments and cultures. And I joined GE about 14 years ago, right at a time when it was really one of the leaders in employee resource groups and diversity. And we lost our way a little bit in successive CEO changes, and we're sort of finding our way back on track. So that's a little bit of the journey that I hope to share with you guys today.
So do you want to give us kind of the rundown on who is GE Digital? What do you guys do? What do you create, et cetera, for those of us who are in, just completely immersed in the financial services industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think many of you know GE, General Electric. It's a 135-year-old company with its origins in innovation and electricity. GE Digital is actually only 6 years old. It was formed in 2015 as the industrial software division of GE. It's about 4,000 employees. And what we build is software for how to run and operate the electrical grid. 40% of the electrons in the world go through our software. It's software in the oil and gas industry. So how do they improve production using software, using data and the insights that come from that? It is aviation software. So what do pilots use for fuel efficiency? What's the data that comes off their actual flight data so that they can be more sustainable in the usage of their overall fuel, and gathering asset records and other things from flight. And we're also very heavily in the manufacturing industry. Some of the vaccines that are out there today for COVID are actually produced on machines that are run on our industrial software. Procter & Gamble is a huge customer of ours, and we really were helping them ramp up during COVID in terms of production and other things. So we're talking about essential industries, mission critical industries, but the software that helps them run that. So the other thing to just know about GE Digital is we are in this interesting environment that we are, in one case, a software company. So B2B, software, B2B tech, Microsoft, Amazon's, Facebook's, and companies like that sort of circle our world. And we've done a lot of partnerships with many of them, including Apple, but we're also very much in the industrial world. And so that is an interesting dichotomy as we talk about diversity and inclusion today, and what that means in terms of who we work with and how we work together.
So yeah, can we unpack that a little bit more? Because that's like a very traditional kind of business. And it sounds a little like financial services, to be honest, because financial services has a big financial tech, a big fintech movement coming through, and where things are starting to become more and more software coming into the market. And there's oftentimes either a fear or a concern, or at least something to bear in mind about this idea that, will your financial advisor be replaced with software? What does that look like? Where does the people fit in? You've got, again, NAIFA ourselves, we're 131 years old. Of course, the insurance industry is even older. New York Life just celebrated 175 years this year. So, it's that idea that you have this transformation and digital transformation coming in, and same type of thing. Does your workforce have kind of everybody multi-generational, right? Global, the whole thing. What does that look like for you? What have you experienced?
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels in what you're sharing there, Suzanne. I mean, there's not an industry in this world that isn't touched by software and technology. That is just core to how we're all being forced to change ourselves and the digital skills that we need to really operate in that world. Some of our challenges that maybe aren't as unique as perhaps I thought they were after you mentioned what financial services is encountering. We have workforces that have been working in industry for decades, right? And they really know by instinct and just sheer experience, how the grid should operate. And if there's a storm coming, what do I do to sort of prepare for that? And then you have a lot of our software engineers, they're young, digital native software engineers who are coming in and saying, well, we have a better way. And there's this data and these workflow tools that can help you manage that even easier. And you don't have to just rely on that instinct and experience. Like, you know, we can give you information today. And what does that mean in terms of how do they adjust the work that they do? In some cases, our customers are embracing of this type of work. In other cases, they're very resistant to it. And it's in all of the different industries we serve. So, you know, in the oil and gas industry, you have the ones that are really digitally savvy and really moving in that direction. And they have digital visions for themselves that are far advanced than where the software even is today. And then you have some laggards who just aren't ready to kind of get on board, and their workforces aren't able to either. So a lot of when we look for talent is people who can kind of bridge that generational divide and take the richness and the experience of people who've been doing it, but building that into models and data and software and workflows so that the new workforce of the future that's coming in, they're learning from that modeling and that work and not necessarily have 20 years of experience to depend upon.
So it's almost like this concept of digital diversity, right? Like how can we bring in that which is really interesting that you're saying that. So I mean, let's talk about this. Where does GE Digital, you know, you're working in conjunction with, you've got brand, you've got corporate communications under your purview, and you're working with HR too. So let's talk a little bit about how are you going about recruitment? Let's start with recruitment there. And who are you recruiting? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one thing that I want to add on what you said, Suzanne, is as CDO, I actually primarily work with our CEO, and HR is a partner in that journey. So, and I think that's an important distinction, because formally at our company and at many companies, chief diversity officers are often in HR, and have found it challenging to really drive the business imperatives when they're not in every business meeting. And that's the difference, is I literally sit in every decision-making meeting with the CEO, and as does our CHRO. And now we're partnering in, how do we think about talent for a new initiative? How do we think of bringing in talent, you know, and sort of, and transforming the culture through talent. So it's just a distinction that we've made for ourselves in the past year.
Well, I love that. I think it's really important, because the real takeaway there, and maybe we should all, so a lot of the financial services companies, you're starting to see either an installation of this position of a diversity officer, and it could be either brand new. And I want to talk about your kind of how that GE Digital did that. But that distinction you just made is super important, because it's really tying diversity far closer to the marketing being at the crossroads of all aspects of the business than being sequestered under this kind of HR capacity, maybe just you know, the human capital piece, right? They're actually saying, no, we're going to put diversity into the DNA of the actual business lines.
Right.
And
exactly. So you're not just looking at it from a talent perspective. How do you build it in the process and the systems, how you run the business? You know, who are the people building strategy? Are they truly diverse teams, right? We're just trying to cross it in all facets. And we're only a year into that journey at GE Digital. So if I go back to your question, Suzanne, it's like, who is it that we're recruiting? And we're really looking for increasing diverse representation in tech. And we have this this way, so, like many companies, right? There are very few things that we can measure today globally. We are mostly all measuring gender, right? And so that is definitely a dimension of diversity that we look at. But unfortunately, it's still limited, because in most cases, you're only looking at female and male, and we're looking at ways on how do we make ourselves more gender inclusive. to folks that don't identify as binary.
Mhm.
Then there is an element, especially here in the US, where we're looking at our EEO categories, right? So this is where you're talking about your African Americans, Latinx, Asian Americans, right? Native Americans and others. And we're trying to really push ourselves to think about things broader. So, you know, if you think of Native Americans, there are First Nations in Canada. There are indigenous populations in many of the countries that we serve, and we're in about 100 different countries today. And they do have very similar experiences and a similar desire to sort of connect. So how do we think of that as an element? We're in Autism Awareness Month, and so we're looking at neurodiversity. What does that look like? That could be anything from, you know, I know many leaders who are dyslexic, right? And they have, and it's not even something that's known. And I only know that because they've chosen to share that with me. But that is a neurodiversity aspect to them. We have individuals who are on the autism spectrum, you know, and other things. So how do we make sure the environment is accommodating to them versus and they have a sense of belonging there. So we're trying to look at these multiple different dimensions of diversity. And when we actually go out to market, it's more about letting people know, here's what we believe in our culture and our DNA. So it's ideas like, we truly believe diverse teams are what's going to allow us to compete in market. If you value that too, we want you. You know, if you want to be part of a culture where everyone has a strong sense of belonging, feeling that they have something to contribute, we want you. So it's sort of changing how we present ourselves to candidates as a brand to say, this is what we value here. This is the DNA we've built here. If this is attractive to you, you know, come join us.
Yeah, that's instead of trying to kind of do the hard sell or the recruitment, you're putting it out there. You know that you're a legitimate, genuine brand, and you're using the law of attraction, right? To say, okay, come to us. If this is vibing with you, then you're probably going to be a good fit here, right?
Right.
And so then once they do that, so how, kind of continuing on that, can you talk a little bit therefore about like, how are you intertwining that throughout? Let's say the person's like, oh yeah, I'm really interested in applying. They're now going through the process. They've joined GE Digital. Because one of the big things that I'd like to explore with you that I've heard a number of times, I mean, countless times in financial services, is that many of the companies have gotten very good, or they think they're good at recruiting and getting into niche populations and trying to tie, you know, underserved markets or other places where they can tie in either, you know, niche markets, et cetera, but they're not so good on the retention side. So they are pretty good at recruitment, but once the person gets in the door, they go, there's nothing here for me. Like, there's people not like me. This is not appreciated. You know, how do you guys at GE Digital bring that out into kind of a program so that you don't have high churn? I'm assuming you don't have high churn because it's GE Digital sounds amazing. So.
So it is true that over the last year, we have not had high churn, and that's only when we've kind of refocused our efforts with these diverse populations as we're able to track them today, right? So one of the things that we measure, we do a culture survey. And one of the questions that we ask in that culture survey is really a sense of belonging to the company. Many of you guys may have heard this, right? But in the D&I framework, right? So when we're talking about diversity, you're excited, you're invited to the dance, you know, you get to be sort of a part of it. Inclusion happens when you are being asked to dance, right? You're like actually being included. Someone's come over, you know, hey, let's tango together. But then that sense of belonging is really about you're dancing like no one's watching. Like you just feel free to be yourself and bring your full self to work. And that's really where we've tried to focus over the past year in terms of what are the structural programs we can put in place so people can bring that sense of belonging. It's everything from the typical things you might see, such as employee resource groups. And we're very intentional with our employee resource groups to say that it is people who identify and allies, right? We want both, and we track both, and we're always looking to grow the allies for those groups. So if you, our women's network looks to see how many people who do not identify as women are also joining that network, and are they participating in events? Are they willing to contribute? So we look at things like that. The other another program that we put in place are mentoring circles. And this, it ends up being, we have senior mentors within the organization. So they're more senior leaders. They're not our CXO suite, or they're not our C-suite, but they are senior leaders in the company, all of whom have gotten rave reviews as mentors in the past. And what they do is they have a circle of up 5 to 7 individuals that for a period of time are part of their core circle. And they meet once a month, sometimes more frequently on whatever topic is top of mind for them. So this is a way of creating another belonging circle, and they're typically cross-functional, cross-regional folks, and they come together picking the topics themselves. Like I don't say to them, okay, this month you're all going to talk about X. They literally decide, hey, we want to talk about how to have difficult conversations, or we want to talk about what we're watching. Like it really doesn't matter. We don't dictate that. It is more about kind of creating these circles and communities. And then one of the other things that we've recently implemented are listening circles. And this is when myself or members of our C-suite, like our CEO, like some of our general managers of our businesses, host conversations with individuals in places that we don't physically get to anymore. So I did one last month, which was a group of individuals from China, and like sort of what's on their mind when it comes to, we are a global company. You know, a lot of what I can be driving from the US could be too US centric. So how do we drive that sense of belonging into regions as well?
So that's, and so GE Digital, just to be really clear, not only are you supporting this, you're offering this, like, what does that look like? Am I going into like my employee portal and I have a choice of all these things to which I can get involved in, and you're giving me space, and managers are supporting this, and I'm saying, hey, I want to be involved in the circle, and you know, is it a reward, or is it just something that everybody can participate within?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. So the way people can find out of what's available is I communicate regularly. I have monthly emails to let them know what resources are available, what programs we're currently running. We have a learning site, which is, hey, you know, I want to learn more about what is you guys talk about neurodiversity. What is that? How do I learn more? What does that mean? I know someone on my team. How do I support them better? Right. So we do provide some learning channels and resources that way as well. And then some of our programs are nomination programs. For example, the mentoring circle. You know, that is something where you, in a conversation with your people leader, would say, hey, I am looking for an experience like this, and they will help make that connection through the HR community and myself.
So I love that too, because what an interesting thing to say that you've got kind of a stepping stone, or there's a path, or there's kind of different ways, but some of them are incentive performance driven. So still kind of keeping that piece within there. I guess on that note, maybe I'll just even ask that about GE Digital as part of that part. What is a company doing in terms of some of those kind of performance, or you know, really, being able, so let me backtrack and give you a little context of where I'm going with that. So in the financial services world, it's very much performance based, right? So they're called producers. You're getting reward and recognition for performance. So you tend to, I think we talked about this before this session, there's typically like an 85% washout rate. So the 15% of the people that make it in this business are competitive, performance minded. They're very, they're driven individuals. So it's another group to have to, and I'm sure that GE Digital is very similar. You want the top candidates, you want the top producers who are going to be innovative in all of these things. So what are some of the things you do within the brand, within corporate communications, within all of the pieces we're talking about here to kind of reward and recognize? I mean, you said that getting into the mentor circle is one, but what about some other pieces you do to help promote, and I think even more so, make sustainable performance?
Yeah. So one thing GE is known for is we have a very rigorous talent review process, and that existed outside of our diversity framework. It's just been something that GE has been known for. In that talent review process, which happens twice in very detailed twice a year, we put talent designations on folks. So you could be high potential, which means like sort of almost your producer category, Suzanne, but not, it's more on not just what you do, but how you do it. Are you doing it the GE way with the GE values? Then there is talent to watch. So sort of, there's sort of up and coming talent. There's something new here, someone that's very new, but already making a very big impact, but you just really don't know yet. And then we just sort of have a group of needs guidance, right? Like just they're struggling to find their way. They don't really feel a sense of belonging yet. We know they have innate talents. We haven't been able to untap them. And that last piece is something that's very new that I've sort of brought in, because if we always just looked at the producers in the world, we might miss out on an opportunity of, cultivating some really great new talent that just doesn't know how to navigate yet their career. So, but of those two, the high potential and the talent to watch, there's 4 potential programs that they could be invited to do. One is they could get exec sponsorship, which is, or it's actually exec championship, in where they get a 1-to-1 relationship with an executive, where it starts off as a mentoring relationship, but the goal is to make it a sponsorship relationship, so that senior executive would, raise their hands for opportunities for this high potential talent that we have. That's a very small group, and it typically happens when we know we have a great talent, but who's just lacking exposure. They're kind of in their insular world, they're just delivering great work. We see great potential in them, but unless they get broader exposure, they're just not gonna, the opportunities are not gonna be as visible for them. So how do we grant them that? There's a second bucket of what we call stretch opportunities. And this is where, there's some capability that we need them to have to get to the next level for a promotion or another career track, et cetera. And we put them on high visible stretch assignments. What that typically means is something has to come off the plate for them to be able to participate in that stretch assignment, but they're typically cross-functional, high exposure at the CEO level type projects. Or CTO level, like we have a lot of tech folks and they want to do more innovative stuff. So how do we give them exposure to our CTO as well? And then there's just we do an executive coaching program, and now in this virtual day and age, there are some great apps out there that allow you to scale this, and so you can have one-on-one coaching for specific talent on areas that they need to develop. I need to manage expectations better. I don't know how to do that, and I'd like to work with a coach on how to do that. So if that is one of their gaps, this is one of the offerings that we can make available to them. And then finally is folks that are looking for people leadership opportunities to be managers, to be people leaders, and they don't have an immediate opportunity to do that within their own team. So this is where we might tap in to find employee resource group leaders if there is a special, I set up this mentoring circle, but I assigned it to someone, right, who is looking for how do I kind of put this whole program again together and really lead a group of people through this program. So those are some examples of what we might do for those producing talent.
It's just phenomenal, just so rich, so robust, and the whole bit. And I guess I've been remiss in even asking, I'll just backtrack to the very beginning. So the entire role of the CD, your Chief Diversity Officer role, has that been there since the inception of GE Digital, or is that something new that's been created?
Yeah, so it's hard. I have to talk about it at the big GE level. So GE, since the 70s and 80s, has been a leader when it came to diversity programs. We had Chief Diversity Officer at the highest levels. You'd be sleeping under a rock if you hadn't noticed for a number of years, GE hasn't been doing so well. We had successive CEO changes. We've really stabilized over the last couple of years. And, but still, unfortunately, it took the murder of George Floyd for there to be a real wake-up call, as it was for many companies across the US, and even more broadly than that, for us to really look at ourselves and say, hey, we dropped the ball here, and how do we fix it? And how do we fix it in a sustainable way that we can't drop the ball again? It shouldn't matter if that leadership changes. We have to structurally put things in place so these things don't fall off. And one of those decisions was instead of just having a CDO at the top of GE, right, a 200,000 person global organization, we have it at each business unit level. So, at the digital level, at the energy level, et cetera, healthcare level. And we form a council together. And they have to be operating leaders reporting to the CEO. And it has to be part of the CEO agenda, CEO metrics on how we measure the business. So that is sort of how I'm able to actually make so much progress in little time, is because it has that level of visibility.
So can you talk a little bit more? I mean, you've mentioned a couple, but can you give us some other kind of, however you guys phrase them, your KPIs, et cetera, about what you're measuring and how you know if you're moving the needle on this, and maybe what are the goals are in the next couple of years, et cetera?
Yeah, so one, in our culture survey, we have about 5 questions that are related to that we ask all employees that are related to our inclusion and diversity efforts. So it is our belonging question, it is equal opportunity, it is our inclusion practices. So there is a host of questions, and I am able to then look at that data and break it down by geography, by if you identify as a US minority, by what gender you identify. So I'm able to look at that multiple dimensions. I use that belonging KPI as my North Star. And we've made about a 6-point progress in the last year. And I want to get 10 more points in the next year. So it is sort of to get to best in class. That's what it would mean. And then we absolutely look at representation numbers. Like many companies have started to report on, the number of leadership that are, females, percentage, I should say, the percentage representation of US minorities. We're trying to add more and more dimension and depth to that, because it is very limiting in terms of what's reportable today versus what we would like to be able to report on.
That's really interesting. So I think it's so interesting you say the usual belonging. I just noted that down as your North Star, because in the association world, one of the key things that has been found in research is that the element of belonging to your professional association has completely diminished in the last 10 to 20 years, kind of an idea. And we're constantly trying to bring back this idea of belonging, right? And that you need to belong to, it's more than just your paycheck or your whatever, your career. It's in
Right.
industry, you belong to this bigger thing than you, and that it's part of the obligation of doing that is that kind of the giving part, right? And what I think is so interesting about what GE Digital is doing is that clearly you're situating yourself as a true entity that's there to give as well, right? So you're making this kind of partnership. It sounds to me, I haven't worked there and that I'm already sold on the company because it sounds like you've got a great partnership with your employees, et cetera, that you're saying, you know, you give, we give. And that's how we can really, again, create that safe space as the like kind of the bottom layer, and then allow that, because otherwise the innovation can never occur, right? If you don't have a safe space to start with, you can't get to the creativity and the innovation. You've got to have some of that trust in there. So I think that's interesting also that your cultural values are you're pushing out there, and you're actually, I mean, I'm totally amazed as another marketer. It's actually the crux of the NAFA brand too. And we just said, listen, there's nothing more marketable than NAFA members, because if you put NAFA members out there, they love what they do so much. They so strongly believe in their values, in our code of ethics of working with integrity, et cetera. All you have to do is kind of put them out there, and like-minded people are attracted and say, I want to be with that kind of those same people. That helps them to perform better, et cetera. But it takes a lot of courage on behalf of the company and the stakeholders, et cetera. Oftentimes, I think to go with that, because it seemed it's a little bit counterintuitive maybe as a marketer, or maybe some of the other business people were like, why can't you just make it happen, right? Like drive it to fruition. You're really situating that and saying, listen, if we do this right, if we're who we are, if we're really living, and I wanted to bring up something that you said about the GE way, because that's such a marketer thing.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to note to everybody on the call today, even if you are not at a large company or at your own agency, I want to bring out that concept of the GE way or your way, because oftentimes people get caught up in writing out the mission statement and the vision statement, but the NAFA way, the GE way, the whatever your agency way is, that's how you do business, right? And that's a really good litmus test. And you can be any size organization. You could be your own, sole proprietorship, or you could be, again, GE itself of 200,000+ people, to talk about what is the GE way, right? So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about the GE way? Because I think that's important. It's a really good take home for everybody. And we have, in the NAFA world, we have from single shingle proprietors to people working at, a New York Life with, tons and tons of people. So, but that concept of having a way that you do business, a way that you conduct yourself, I think is really important, because everybody can then say like, oh, that's not what we do, right? And it allows you to set that standard. So what's the GE way?
Yeah, it's all rooted in our behaviors. And some companies call these their values. It could have a whole host of names. So we at GE, we call them our behaviors. So the first is act with humility. So this is the core to anything that we do, which is you come in respectful intent, inclusive of all ideas at the table. You're not there to judge. You are not the smartest person in the room. Only collectively are we going to get at the right answer together. Then what you're doing is leading with transparency. So this is, we talk about embrace the red. What isn't working, right? Let's be transparent about that. My CEO likes to say it's about making the unclear clear. That's what transparency really is. So just how do you kind of shed the light on what's going on, how you say not what other people want to hear, but what really needs to be said. But you can only do that if you come in with humility, right? So humility is sort of that door opener, and then you go to transparency, and then you're delivering with focus. And this is customer is at the center, and I don't know of a successful company where the customer isn't at the center, right? So it's really about that. That is our focus, and how do we make sure that the process is such that it makes it easy for the customer. The interaction is such that it is inviting for the customer. So those are our GE behaviors. At GE Digital, we have found the need to add a couple of more. So we have 5 in total. One is innovate with customers. And this was, innovation is just core to who we are as a company. I mean, Thomas Edison was our founder, right? Like, talk about like innovation, invention, like those are our roots, and we want to be stay to those roots. But we don't do that for innovation's sake. We do that because there is a need our customers have. We are in the middle of a global climate crisis. We have to have solutions that, from a software perspective, that help us decarbonize. And so, like, that is a one way we're innovating with customers. We're sitting down with the biggest grids in the world and saying, here is how you're going to use digital to decarbonize, right? So that's a little bit about it. And because of that level at which we're trying to operate the work, it's expect to change the world. What we should be working on are the toughest, hardest problems. That's why you come and join a company like GE. That's why you join GE Digital, is because you want to be working on things that actually make the world work. And like any company and organization, it's that purpose piece. How do I feel really connected to the purpose so that I'm willing to wake up every day and do the hard work of things we don't know how to solve yet? And that's what we call the GE Digital way.
It's just wonderful. So I know we're coming up on our time, but maybe in the last couple of minutes, do you have any resources? Do you have any kind of takeaways that you could provide to us, or things that keep you motivated? How do you keep learning? Where are you getting your we like to call it in our industry, the juice, right? So where are you getting the juice to keep on going? And do you have anything you want to share with us that you think would help out our industry?
Yeah. So I think we're at a time where there is no gap in whatever sort of interests you in terms of when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? So I would say it always starts with the why. Know why you care. Why does it matter to you? And then seek out those resources that support you in that. For me, that why is, I think there's elements of diversity we haven't even untapped that exist. And so it's sort of, I like to get really nerdy and deep and go deep, right? And right now I'm going really deep on neurodiversity. I actually have a very strong feeling that for my company, that this might be the untapped talent source, because neurodiverse individuals actually are amazing at tech. So like, how do we really tap into that? So if you guys can sort of just find that and then go deep on the resources that are there, and think about, I've started following individuals who think differently than me about these things, because it really challenges my thinking. And so that's maybe not specific enough, but I think it's part of the journey, is sort of why do you want to do it, and then how do you then go deep in those areas?
I think that's great. Well, I'll take any questions. If anyone has anything, put it in the chat box. I know one of the last kind of pieces that somebody did ask me earlier was just kind of from a, if we were to think and kind of go again, other types of diversity. By the way, you got some nice props for mentioning neurodiversity. One of our attendees said that that's not normally mentioned and should be. So thank you very much for that. And we'd love to keep following on that, because I can completely see that in your industry. I'd say in the financial services industry, it's finding that we have a do-gooder, happiness, personal, like listening gene out there. Like there's some gene out there that all of our really top people, they're people, and that's again a special skill to try to look for, and then also kind of keep energized. So kind of my last question about diversity is kind of about that energy piece. And I know I'm kind of throwing this at you. We didn't talk about this before, but it's keeping up the energy. And you're right, if you're talking about a brand and communications and all these things we're talking about, I think that it's very, what I'm also seeing with a year plus into COVID, with the post kind of George Floyd era, et cetera, that you see people getting very tired getting very tired. There's a lot of fatigue around these issues, et cetera. And so one of the questions is, how do we stay energized so we don't lose this momentum? Because I do think we could all agree that we're in a time of change, and it can be a very positive, potentially very positive change. How do we keep that going? From your standpoint, what do you see? How can you help drive that?
Yeah. So what works for me are two things. One is a strong sense of purpose. And I truly believe the work I'm doing as CDO is the most important work I'll ever get asked to do. There is nothing that, other than probably raising my son, that's going to have quite the impact.
That's up there. Yeah. That's
going to have the type of impact and long lasting impact. Right. And I know it from just like the day-to-day conversations I get enriched with, whether they're the difficult ones or the really positive ones of, wow, thank you for mentioning my holiday. No one ever mentions my holiday, right? So it's purpose, but then it's this idea of restorative rest. And I am a strong believer in this. It's what is that thing that just really allows you to completely re-energize yourself? For me, it's like arts and craft, coloring, it's like, and not even with my kid. It's like, I'm doing this around, I'm creating something.
This is my time, Akash.
This is my time, and that's just what works for me. There are famous historical figures that talk about this idea of restorative rest. And there was, I think it was Winston Churchill who laid bricks, and it was a former president, Barack Obama, he reads, right? So whatever your restorative rest is, find it and make sure you're investing time in it.
That's great. Great advice. Well, I know we're at time. I'm going to turn it back to Stephen Kagawa, but Ninu, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and GE Digital. And we hope to see you soon.
Yep. Thank you, Susanna. It was great to talk to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ninu and Suzanne. And I did a really bad thing here. Suzanne, and I can't see can you all see my face? Maybe you guys are lucky that you can't see it. But anyway, so Suzanne, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce Suzanne Caruana, who is a big wig at NAIFA. She's our Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and you did a fabulous job sharing and getting the tidbits of brilliance from Ninu. And Ninu, thank you so much for letting us know it's not just about recruiting the people, it's the culture that you build. And it's not just something that CDOs do at the Human Resources Department, it's right to the CEO from the top bottom and the bottom up, and that you guys make things happen in that way. Ninu, you make Thomas Edison proud. Congratulations to you and your organization for doing all the things you're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, what an incredible first day of NAIFA's first ever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Impact Week. I hope you found our presenters insightful and hopeful as I did. And I want to thank each and every one of you who shared, and to all of you for joining us today. As this is our first and very first ever DEI Impact Week, we need your help to shape even better related efforts with relevant content of significance that's significant to you. So your opinions matter, and you can share your opinions by responding to the survey that's sure to hit your email boxes later today. Well, this wraps up day one of NAIFA's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Impact Week, and we'll be here tomorrow again at noon Eastern Time with many more great speakers and presentations. And I think all of you agree it was a fabulous, fabulous day. Well, make it a wonderful day if you're in Hawaii. You got the whole day ahead of you, a meaningful afternoon if you're on the West Coast, and a great evening for those of you on the East Coast. Aloha and mahalo, my love and gratitude to you all. See you tomorrow.